Okay, here today with Andrew Sheaff. Wrote a book called A Constraints-Led Approach to Swim Coaching, mate. You've been in the game for a long time. Congrats on the book. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Brett. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Good, mate. Yeah, you're coming from Virginia. Did you grow
Mhm.
up in that area?
So I grew up. I was born in Boston, lived there till I was about 6, and then was in Philadelphia for most of my childhood.
Boston. There we go. I lived in Boston for a couple of months last year.
What time of
It's
year?
tough living, man. It was the time of year that you don't want to be living in Boston. It was,
Yeah, yeah,
I think they had a record cold when I was there. It was something like minus 20 degrees or something. It was like
yeah,
wildly cold. So crazy
yeah.
place.
It snows and then it doesn't. It never goes away.
Yeah, it just doesn't go away. Yeah, it was incredible. But mate, give the listeners a little bit of swimming background on you. Talk to us
Yeah,
about what where you've got to this point. You know.
yeah, sure. So I started swimming pretty late. I was about 15,
Hmm.
and then uh, I swam, through high school, and then went to the University of Pittsburgh where I swam, and then after that, was a graduate assistant at University of Maryland for a couple of years, and then coached at Bucknell University for a few years, which is in central Pennsylvania. Then I was at Northwestern for a while, and then I was at University of Virginia. Was my most recent job. I was there for about 6 years. So coaching mostly college, did some age group stuff over the summers. Several years, and that's my primary coaching background and swimming experience.
Now, what led you to writing a book? Because I've just written a book. It's coming out in December, and I signed on to the book deal, thinking that it wouldn't be that difficult, and it's very
Yeah,
very difficult to write a book. So
right,
what
right.
led you to writing a book?
Yeah. Well, so I found that the writing part wasn't as bad, but I found that the editing part and getting
Yeah.
everything, like getting my ideas to make
Hmm.
sense to someone
Hmm.
who isn't in my
Yeah.
brain, that was
Yeah.
a lot more challenging for sure. And so for me, it kind of came about was I pretty early in my career, I was pretty interested in the skill development stuff, and it just seemed to me to be a pretty big limiting factor for why some people swim faster than others. And so I reached out to this guy who does a lot of motor learning research over in Europe, and basically asking him a bunch of questions, and he had helped me with a lot of stuff. And then that relationship went on for about I don't know 8 years or so. And then he just basically said, "Hey, we're looking for someone to write a book about some of these ideas in swimming. Do you want to do it?" And you know, to me, it just seemed like an idea that I didn't want to say no to, because I had no real idea, kind of like you, what I was getting myself into. But it was just one of those things that was like, it was an opportunity that was presented, and I knew that I would regret not doing it more than regret doing it. So went on and gave it a shot.
And what does it mean exactly the title of the book is A
Yeah,
Constraints-Led Approach to Swim Coaching. What does a
sure.
constraints-led approach mean?
So it's this kind of this idea in terms of how people move and how people learn skills. And so we'll kind of frame it in a swimming context. So you have three different things, constraints that shape how swimmers move through the water. So one, you have like the task. Two, you have them as an individual, and then three, you have the environment. And so like the task, if you ask someone to swim a 50 meters as fast as they can, or you ask them to swim, a 1500-meter race as fast as they can, they're going to use a very different strategy in order to make that happen. And so the things you ask swimmers to do necessarily changes how they're going to approach that. And they tend to do that relatively intuitively. So like, people learn very, very quickly that the way to swim a 1500 is going to be very different than the way to swim a 50. And so they figure out that there's going to be a way to accomplish that task a little bit better than another way. And so what you ask them to do, the task shapes, what the approach that they're going to take. And then
Hmm.
also who they are as an individual also affects that. And so, my favorite example is you've got Ian Thorpe, you've got Janet Evans. They're both are swimming the 400-meter race. They've got, they both won, multiple Olympic championships. They both were the world record holders forever. But if you watch Ian swim and you watch Janet swim, they take a totally different approach to that race in terms of their skills. And the reason is one's 6'5" or whatever, got size 17 feet, and one's 5.5 feet and a whole lot smaller. And so they have to use different strategies in order to make that happen. And then the last one is the environment. Not as big a deal in swimming, but like even, long course to short course, you see people using different strategies to be successful. Certainly, in 100 you see very different races, and even in a 200 you see different races. And so all those things kind of interact, and they produce how swimmers move through the water. And when you can influence those little pieces, then you can start to really change how people swim, and that can be a lot more effective than just telling them what to do. And so rather than telling someone, put your elbow here, I can give them something else that is going to almost force them to do that. And that's going to be, for me, a lot more efficient, a lot more effective at activities that we want.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I like those three different areas that you talked about. We'll kind of dive into those a little bit too. In terms of some simple swim terms that we use and that can be applied to swimming and training especially, what are the differences? What's the difference between a skill and a drill? Like for those that don't fully understand, like they might sometimes bucket them together. What's a skill and what's a drill?
So a skill is whatever that they need to do to accomplish a goal, basically. And so, if I want to get across the pool as fast as I can, how I choose to do that, like the skills that I use, some are going to be more effective than others. Dropping my elbow, probably not a great way to get across the pool fast. Setting up the stroke really well and holding that position throughout the whole stroke, that's probably a pretty good skill to have. Whereas to me, a drill is an activity or something you're having them do to try to help them learn a skill. And so that's kind of the big difference. Is the skill is to me the end, the end that you're trying to get to, whereas the drill is a means to get to the end. And so, really being good at drills doesn't really matter. What really matters is, can you execute the skills? And the value of a drill is really going to be dependent on whether it actually helps the swimmer learn a skill or not.
Right. I'm been very fortunate. I've gone around to a lot of programs over the past 5 years since I kind of stepped back from full-time coaching. Did a lot of clinics around the country and around the world. And one of the areas that kind of kept coming up for me that we're still not at the level where I think we should be in terms of coaching is this skill acquisition and the quality of the skill, right? Like for me, the biggest thing I saw was just the way that kids would push off the wall. We're in such a volume centric kind of mentality in swimming where we've got to get a certain amount of volume in, and coaches overlook the skill development, the skill acquisition, and maybe even the importance of the skill itself, because we're so caught up in the volume of the work that we need to do. So yes, kids are pushing off the wall, obviously, to get the volume, to get from one end of the pool to the other. But the way they're doing it, to me, is so detrimental. And, if we just spent time on skills each day and emphasizing the skill and reinforcing the skill and even developing the skill, I think we could get so much further. Do you see the same sort of thing?
Yeah, for sure. And I think the challenge is that there is a lot of pressure to get volume in and to train hard, because obviously to some extent that certainly works. But ultimately, the best swimmers in the world, they are very good swimmers. They're very skilled at what they do. You don't see too many people that are in there just thrashing around because and swimming fast because they're ridiculously fit. The swimmers that go fast are the ones that have the best skills. And so it's a huge part of that process is helping them develop those skills from the beginning. And so kind of like you alluded to, doing more of bad is not going to ever turn into good. And so that always has to be a priority, because people are not going to magically become skilled at anything in life just because they do it a lot. It has to be done with intention. And like you said, it's got to be from the beginning. And if that's not being reinforced, it's not just going to magically show up.
Yeah, I mean, you and I and people like us study the best swimmers in the world because that's where we get our learnings from. Like we watch them, and then we see a development, or we see a progression of a skill or a technique, and we think, oh, how can we explore that even further? Like like the straight arm swimming, for instance. People didn't swim with a straight arm 25 years ago, generally. Maybe you could argue that Janet Evans did, but generally for power and speed, we were still swimming bent arm freestyle. Now almost everybody who swims sprint freestyle these days is swimming with a straight arm. But beyond that, just the progression of skills and the progression of techniques, even butterfly, like butterfly is extremely flat these days. Butterfly used to undulate very, very much. That's how we swam it. So the development is there, but you're right. Like when you're studying the best in the world, their skills are at peak, right? And so let's take a guy like Michael Phelps, who we regard as the greatest swimmer of all time, right? We get lost in his training and how hard he worked, and the fact that he didn't miss any workouts, and the volume of work that he was putting in, and the way that he could hold pace and get certain splits and do something. But the way that Michael Phelps swam was elite, right? Like everything he did was elite. Like the skill level that Michael swam at was elite. And I think sometimes that gets overlooked, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah. I remember, I think someone had asked, this was a couple of years ago when David Popovich broke the world record in 100 meters. And someone had asked Bob what he thought. And basically Bob was like, well, he's keeping resistance as low as he can. And that's exactly what made Michael so great. And so, the skill part is huge. And obviously Michael was one of the best. And the fact that he was, could have medaled in two different strokes, and probably could have medaled in backstroke if he had done it, and was pretty good at breaststroke too. Like, he has a skill set that was better than anyone else, and obviously was ridiculously fit too. But the skill set to me is what made him so good at so many different things. He was just really good at holding a ton of water in every stroke, and really good at keeping resistance really low. And that allowed him to go fast, not just across different strokes, but from, 100 to 400 meters was, a world record holder.
Yeah. So what's your advice then for coaches, especially a lot of coaches have big teams, right? Like there's very few coaches that have one or two athletes that they're just working with continuously. So most coaches have a big group. So how do you build in skill development into big groups?
Right. So I think that the biggest thing is to find strategies where you don't have to be the center of attention. You don't have to be the one that is telling them what to do. If your plan is to tell kids, hey, think about your elbow position for the next 30 minutes, I think that is going to be a lost cause. No one's going to be able to pay attention and lock in like that for that amount of time. And you certainly don't have the time or the energy to tell each and every swimmer that they're doing a great job with that. But if you can use strategies that almost force them to do those things, then you're going to be a lot better off. So something simple as having them swim with a closed fist, that's going to definitely encourage them to use their forearm more effectively. Or if you've got a paddle, you can have them hold it upside down like that, and they're going to they've got to swim and use their forearm more effectively. Stuff like you giving them stroke counts, that's going to hold them again accountable to some sort of efficiency. And so if their skills are starting to fall apart, that's going to be reflected in their stroke count. And if their stroke count 5 strokes, over the course of 200 meters, they know that they've got a problem, and they can hold themselves accountable to that. And certainly you can hold them accountable to that too. And so the more that you find strategies and find drills and find different ways to design sets that kind of encourage them to execute the skills and almost require them to execute the skills when they're swimming, when they're training, then that's going to be a lot more effective than giving them whatever set and then saying, think about X, Y, and Z. If that skill, whatever it is built into the set, that's going to be a lot more effective. And like the example you used earlier was, kids that just aren't even pushing off the wall. Well, a simple thing is, you throw a cone in the pool, or you tell them they can't do anything. They can't kick. They can't break their streamline until, their feet are past the flags, or whatever is going to be appropriate for that age level. And then all of a sudden that's built into the set. They have to do that skill. They have to execute that skill. And so rather than saying, make sure you're doing good push-offs, you build that into the set, into the expectations of the set. And, if they're not doing it at first, you just stop them, let them know that, hey, this is part of the set and we're doing this over again. But if you give them something concrete and something that allows them to get really good feedback as to whether they're being successful or not, that tends to be a whole lot more engaging than just, pay attention to A, B, or C, or think about X, Y, and Z. Those things don't really have much of a half-life, but just with a little bit more intention and a little bit more attention to detail, you can design those things into the sets that get their get them engaged in what they're doing and make them think about what you want them to work on.
Yeah, one of the ways I do it too is I look at volume a little bit differently, right? Like I don't look at volume of just the amount of yards you've done. I look at
Right.
volume in terms of the amount of quality you've done too, right? Like,
Right.
so
Right.
what I do is I'll shorten my warm up a little bit. Like, so instead of just getting kids to swim up and down for 20 minutes warming themselves up, I'll swim a couple of hundred, just loosen up, and then I'll get into some form of skill development. And so my volume is based around how much time and attention have you put on
Right.
progressing that skill, right? So it might
Right.
be turns on a particular day, and I'll say, all right, we're going to spend 15 minutes working in and out of walls, just working on our turns, and the volume of the work that you've put into perfecting your turn is greater now, right? Like you've spent
Right.
time and
Right.
attention onto that. So to me, that's volume of work. And then what I'll do is I'll say, okay, now we've worked on that skill. Now go and apply it to the set, right? Whether it be a preset, a main set, whatever it is, but you take that skill and you apply it. So that's how I have found I'm able to keep the same format of work, right? Warm up, main set, cool down, things like that, but adding in skill development
Yeah. Yeah.
before
Yeah.
you warm up. That's the best way
Right.
that I've done it anyway.
Yeah, and there's got to be a connection between what you're doing beforehand and then what you're asking them to do during whatever other sets or whatever main work or whatever main sets you're doing. That gives them a much better understanding of what they're doing and what they're feeling. And exactly like you said, it's like connecting, setting them up, letting them feel it, letting them work, get some good work in with specific skills, and then, all right, can we do this in a little bit more challenging context? And that gives them a framework for, hey, we just worked on it. This is what we've been focusing on. Let's make it happen again in this, in this a little bit more challenging situation or set, for sure.
Welcome to the Sprint Revolution School. This is the culmination of my life's work. Everything I've learned coaching some of the world's elite athletes, including Cesar Cielo, Fred Busquet, Bruno Fratis, and leading my Auburn team to the NCAA championship in 2009 alongside the legend Richard Quick. Now all of that knowledge is available to you. Our program is structured into easy-to-follow, interactive modules designed to take you from where you are today to becoming the fastest swimmer you've ever been. Check out the link in the description or simply search The Sprint Revolution on school.com to get started. Yeah, and one of the things I learned from one of my coaches, Ian Pope, he would really push this on us hard and make us to buy into it and believe in it. I didn't have coaches necessarily before that who put so much time and attention into the development of the skill each day. So he would actually write it in to the program and get us to value it. So like if he valued
Yeah.
it, then get us to value it, then it meant something, right? So if like
Right.
if he's pushing skill, and then he's saying, okay, apply it now. So it might be a situation like this. Here's an example. You're doing some turn work, you're working on in and out on a straight line, and you're working off coming off, with 5 dolphin kicks. And so you're repeating that over and over again for 15, 20 minutes. And then it says, okay, now we're going to go into this set, and you've got to come off your wall and hit your 5 dolphin kicks and apply
Right.
that to the
Exactly.
set.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And the key thing is like you said, you get what you expect as a coach. And so if he says, we're going to do these 5 kicks and then we're going to do it at the set, like it's not a suggestion. You have to do the 5 kicks. And like there's going to be a problem if you don't do the 5 kicks. And I'm sure he set the state or set the tone that, and you knew if he asked for 5 kicks, like you have to do 5 kicks or else that's not going to be the set. And we're going to, stop or do it over or whatever it's going to be. But it's that connection between, like you said, what you're doing beforehand, what you're doing during the main work, and then also the value that you put on it as a coach. Because if it's not something you're going to hold them accountable to, they're not going to hold themselves accountable to it. And so when you value it, they start to value it too.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. One of the other big things that I see around the world is that we have good drills and bad drills, and a lot of the time, programs will just go to bad drills, and I even got my drilling to a point where I didn't like initially to put it on an interval, because I felt like interval based drills force the athlete to then cut corners and rush the drill and pick the easiest drill that's going to get them from point A to point B as fast as possible because they're on this interval and they want to get rest. They want to get back to the wall. So they're going to, it diminishes the drill. So I actually did away with, for a period of time, until they develop the skill in the drill to a point. There are fast drills for sure, but doing away with a time interval and saying, okay, and then teaching specific drills that I want seen. So you might have a set of 5 drills for butterfly and 5 drills for backstroke and breaststroke and free. And these are the drills that you can choose from, so that ultimately, once you perfect those 5 drills, and I say, okay, we're going to do 450s drill and keep it open-ended, well, then you have, a kind of an arsenal of drills to pick from, right? Like you can go to your back pocket and say, all right, I'm gonna do this one because I want to work on that one. Someone else say, I'm going to do this one because I want to work on that one. So is that what you find as well? Like there are good drills and bad drills?
Yeah. And I mean, I think the biggest thing is so the only reason you're using a drill is because, to help them learn the skill, kind of like we talked about earlier. And so if that drill doesn't make your life easier as a coach, then why are you using it? And so it should make it easier for them to learn the skill, because if it doesn't, then you should just try, they should just swim. And the goal should be to figure out how to make that happen when they swim. And so to me, I want, drills are ones that make it much easier for swimmers to feel whatever the key skill is and to get a better understanding. And the easier it is for them to feel that, and the faster it works, the more I consider that to be a drill that I want to spend my time doing. And so, like, I almost want ones that they can't do it wrong. And so, like, an example for me, is like underwater breaststroke, swimming breaststroke underwater. A lot of swimmers struggle with their timing. They can't get the arms and the legs going at the right time. But if they swim underwater breaststroke, they almost always get the timing right. They go arms and then legs, arms and then legs. Because if they don't, they literally come to a stop, and they can feel that. And so they don't do that. And so whenever you can find drills that make it much easier for swimmers to feel the key skills and make it much more difficult for them to do it wrong, then that's just going to make your life easier as a coach. Because if you have 30 kids in the water and the drill requires you to constantly remind them to do it right or to not do it wrong, that's going to be a lot harder than if you can give them something that makes them do it right, 90% of the time or whatever it is. That's going to make life so much easier. And again, like, it takes time to develop skills. And so if you're using drills that don't work very well, that's going to be a challenge. And like you said, if you have 5 drills for each stroke, well, that's 20 drills. That's going to take a lot of time to learn all that. And so if you can find ways to make it happen where they learn faster, they learn more effectively, and they learn with less input from you, then that's going to be a way better outcome, because now you can start worrying about, all right, how do we actually do this, like you said, faster and, under some pressure. And that's really what they're going to have to do in a race. So the sooner you can get there, the better.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with all that. Yeah. Do you have any specific drills that you want to name and out as bad drills that coaches go to? I have one for fly that I can't stand, and I wish we would get away from it. So I
go
can
ahead.
give you that
go
one
first.
Well, mine is single arm fly. I can't stand it. It just, like, it's usually done really poorly. It's usually done ineffectively, and it's done just lazy. And I really don't see the use for it, because most of the time, it encourages kids to kick, from the knee down, because you're just trying to move. Like, I'm very hip driven in fly. I like the flow. I like movement, and I like it to keep flat. There's a lot of up and down movement. Generally, they'll chop in, so they're not even getting the hand into the right position. They're not catching water up front. It's usually rushed, and it's usually done poorly. So I try and it's usually the first drill they'll pick. So I'll say, hey, because it's the easiest, right? It's simple. It's kind of a lazy drill. And so they'll go to single arm fly, and it doesn't look anything like fly, and it doesn't look very effective. So I tend to just cut it out completely and say, that's a bad drill. Don't go to that one. And it's
right.
And so I give them choices of other drills that I think are way better than that. Right. I'll give you, for instance, of a drill that's better. Okay. So I'll keep your hands out front, kind of like, I call this like in the Superman position. So you can basically where you're going to land and catch water. So land there, put a snorkel on to keep length and keep line. And then just dolphin kicking, like you can do it from here, just kind of undulating your body and just movement, getting that small movement, get that flow from the hips, keep the hips moving. And then every now and then you might do like a 3 kick and 1 pull, and you can pull down, drive your body forward, okay, and then you can recover back underneath your body. That to me is a much more effective fly drill. It takes a little bit more time to learn and get good at, but it's way more effective than just slopping through a single arm fly. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. So like whenever you can get drills that work for you and solve the problem that you're looking for, and get it to show up in the stroke itself, then I think a lot of it is like you kind of said, that if they're just doing it and there's no intention behind it, it doesn't it's never going to be effective. It's got to have a purpose, and the more that they understand the purpose and they can feel that and how it connects to their actual swimming, I think that makes a huge difference too. I guess kind of similar to yours, one I would pick on is one arm freestyle for a lot of the same reasons. It's like people just don't do it with much intention, and they just kind of they don't connect to anything. And the other issue is that, like, the rhythm of it is just very, very different from what freestyle feels like. Like that's not how freestyle feels. And so one, I guess, similar to what you said, one that I prefer to do is I like having them, like people call it long dog or underwater recovery. It allows them to still focus on the same things. They can actually feel their rotation timing a lot better. They can also, focus on just reaching straight forward. A lot of people are reaching all over the place when they recover the arms, and then pulling straight back, which is something, again, a lot of people struggle with, but it's a lot easier to manage because they don't have the overarm or over water recoveries. So it's a simplified version of freestyle, and allows them to focus on those key aspects of the stroke, but it's also it's similar enough to regular freestyle that it's pretty close to what they need to do, and it's easier for them once they figure out that drill. They can usually make those skills happen when they swim freestyle, but it also gives them it's simple enough that they can work on those things and make them happen without too much of a distraction.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely agree. And one of the things that I've found too is through exposure is learning that we spend a lot of time on the catch and catching water. Like people talk about freestyle catch all the time. We talk about catching. We don't spend a lot of time on learning how to kick effectively. We don't spend a lot of time. Like to me, the legs are the engine, right? The legs are going to drive the stroke. The legs are going to be the first thing that go on you in a race as well. And once those legs go, your body falls apart, the technique falls apart. So teaching kick, I think, is far more effective. I'm not saying that teaching catch isn't, right? But I think we get so locked in on that. And I find a lot of kids are very upper body driven because we're thinking of catching water with our arms, but we're not really doing much with our legs and teaching people how to kick effectively,
Yeah, for sure. And I think part of it is like it's just harder to teach kicking because it's happening so fast. It's it's not quite as obvious as to what's happening, but like you said with the catch stuff, it's pretty like the positions are pretty simple, and it's pretty easy to see when someone's not doing it. But yeah, but kicking matters. Like as soon as that goes, body position goes, you're getting less propulsion from your legs. The rhythm falls, like, it's just bad things happen real fast, and it makes everything harder, and then things get even worse. So like one thing I really like, and I was not a big fan of them at first, I just kind of thought it was a gimmick, was the drag socks or whatever type of any type of like mesh bag or even shoes, because if swimmers if they just like kick with straight legs, they won't go anywhere when they're wearing that stuff. And if they just bend their knees, they won't go anywhere. But if they get like the whipping action from the kick, then they actually will go forward. And so they learn really, really fast. I have to kick pretty well or I'm not going to go anywhere. And of course, it helps to develop the strength of the legs too. And that works for flutter, freestyle backstroke and butterfly. It works for breaststroke too, but maybe for a little bit different reason. And so it makes a huge difference. And once people can kick effectively, and they can kick effectively in their stroke, and they can hold it, then it makes such a big difference to their overall swimming. Maybe the amount of propulsion they get is like 10% or 20%. The arms run the show, but if the legs aren't there, nothing really works. And so it's got to be a huge focus.
Yeah, I actually call them power socks. I sell them, and because I'm a big believer in them too. And the reason why I call them power, because drag to me has a negative connotation.
Sure.
the power itself, like I think you're right. Like if you get that flick and then you take those socks off, that you get so much power out of that. I get kids all the time, using the socks, and then they one girl said to me, like, I forget what she said exactly, like the words, like my feet feel magical or something like that. Like,
right.
Or no, she said my feet feel dangerous. It's like she took these socks off and
That's
her
even
feet
better.
were just like, yeah. I was like, yeah, it was wild. So I love them, and I actually I've got 2 sizes, so I've got a big pair that you can wear with fins too. It actually adds some resistance to it, and it works really effectively because you've still got to flick the fin. And then I've got these small ones that you can just use for just speed, dolphin kicking off the wall for 50 meters or whatever it is, or just fast flutter. And man, when you take those things off, you feel $1 million. So I really like those resistance tools because, like you said, it teaches you to get into the right position. Otherwise, you really don't go anywhere.
Right. And so that's kind of like a perfect example of kind of a lot of the ideas in the book and what I was referencing earlier. It's like you could spend all day just trying to teach someone how. It's like, all right, you got to, kick with your straight on the up kick and then bend on the down kick and like try to like get swimmers to understand that concept. Or you can just put the socks on them and they're going to get 90% of the way there in 10 seconds. Yeah, they have to work it. They have to keep learning. They have to keep training. They have to do all those things. But you'd have to do that if you were trying to tell them what to do either. And so whenever you can find those tools, and it could be a drill, it could be, something like a stroke count, it could be a training aid of some sort. Those are the things that can make such a huge difference so fast. And exactly like you said, like you're not going to teach someone to get that same feeling, to get that same outcome as compared to just putting the socks on. And that's going to make such a big difference in so little time. And with so many different skills that you have to develop, you can't afford to waste time not using those type of strategies because one, kicking with the socks is two. So you're getting them fit as well at the same time, but you're also taking their skills to another level that you couldn't do otherwise.
Yeah, for sure. How did you determine what to put in the book and what to leave out? Because I know that's tough too.
Yeah. I guess I just kind of wrote, just kind of, brain dumped everything. And then you start to kind of figure out what matters. So like to me, the big idea I wanted to get across was, to go fast is pretty simple. It's all right. You got to create a lot of propulsion using the arms and the legs. The more, the better. And then, you got to kind of create a line as you're moving through the water that's pretty straight. And the straighter that line, the less resistance they're going to create. And the faster they're going to go. And so how do you figure out how to help them do that as efficiently as possible? And then how do you help them do that, when they're training too and developing the fitness that they need to be successful? So it kind of started with that premise. And then moving back from there, it's like, all right, well, what are the different strategies that work? What are the different types of strategies? So like things like using stroke rates and stroke counts can be really effective. That's kind of like one aspect of it. Another aspect is, like using training aids like paddles or fins or drag socks or whatever it's going to be. How can those tools be used? Different things like help them, feel the water better, like closed fist or, something like an okay hand or stuff like that. And then just kind of organizing those ideas based upon, how can we help swimmers learn these skills that are going to help them swim fast? Because if they can learn to move more water, they can learn to swim, straighter. They will swim faster. So it's how do you go about figuring out the different ways to make that happen with that kind of big picture idea, that big picture goal in mind.
Awesome. Where can people find the book, by the way?
They can get it on Amazon. If you just search my name, search the title, you can get it there. And you can I've seen it at different Amazons. It's not just like the US Amazon. My website is coachandrewsheaff.com. You can get it there too. Whatever works best for you.
Are you in need of a pace clock? Looking to finally upgrade those ancient analog clocks? The Swim Nerd Pace Clock is the most innovative digital pace clock. Go to swimpractice.com to check it out.
Cool. Awesome. The other thing I was going to say, you spent time at Virginia. They're obviously on a roll of championships. What do you think they're doing maybe better there or consistently better there or just different than everybody else that is helping them and Todd have the type of success other than just having, extremely talented athletes? That always helps, but they're obviously doing something that's unique enough to be consistently winning championships?
Yeah. I would say it's in some ways it's many of the things that we've kind of talked about. I speak for my time there, not necessarily what's being done now. Although I don't expect too much has changed from a big picture standpoint. Is that things were done really, really well. There was a really high expectation of execution. From day one, we were always really clear about what needed to happen. And like right now during this repetition. Kind of the standard of execution, both from a performance standpoint and then also how it happened and what needed to happen, technically and from a skill perspective. And so I think, those things make a really, really, really big difference. And so it was always that things needed to be done really, really well. And, when things were done really, really well, that's great. And then we just kind of escalated the expectation. And so I think it sounds kind of simple, but simple isn't always easy to do. It was about that. It was very focused on doing things at a very, very high level, very, very consistently. And when given the choice, we maybe didn't do as much as some other programs did or do, but I think we did a really good job of doing it at a really high level.
Well, that's it. We're back to that volume question, right? Like the volume of quality that you're doing is higher than everybody else. The volume of work in terms of yardage, maybe not, but the volume of quality is high. So when you outweigh the quality of the volume, then yeah. My question to you is, do we have to wait till they get to college? Can we be doing some form of this and having these expectations with club kids, high school kids? Can we do it earlier?
I think certainly from a technical execution, I think that starts as young as possible. It's like there's no reason that people can't be doing. The sooner that people do things well, the more that they will get better at doing things well, and it becomes just an expectation and something that they can continue to escalate. I think from a training intensity standpoint, I think it's always good to have somewhere to go in the future, and so I think that doesn't always need to be like pushed to the max, but there's a difference. Those two things don't have to be the same thing. You can swim very, very, very well, and it doesn't have to be at a maximal intensity, but regardless of what they should do and what they are doing, they have to be swimming really, really well. And I think that needs to start as soon as possible. As soon as they can swim legal strokes, it's like that has to be a huge focus of what everyone's doing, because that's the only way that they're going to be able to execute at a really high level and continue to get better at those things. More never turns into better, or more of bad never turns into good. And so starting with what they can do really, really well is really important. And then that's where you can start to escalate, the volume and the intensity demands once they've demonstrated that they can do things well. Because, a saying that someone told me a long time ago was like, no one cares how many times you can't dunk a basketball. It's like, if you can't dunk it once, you can't dunk it twice. So let's just make sure we can dunk it once, and then let's go from there. So I think doing things at a very high level is really important to start with, and then you can do more of it. But there's no reason that people can't swim well at any age.
Correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm just going to play devil's advocate, but it does feel like in swimming there is this presumed assumption that everybody that you're talking about from a young age is going to end up swimming in college, and the reality of it is there's a massive drop-off rate, right?
Yeah,
massive drop-off rate. So it's a very small percentage of people that go from 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old swimmers to college athletes. There's a huge drop-off rate. So with that being said, I'm looking for ways to keep kids in the sport longer. Yeah. And there's a formula that we've done it. And from that formula, we've got this massive drop-off rate. So with that in mind, I'm looking at different ways. And the different ways that I'm looking at is, you talked about, well, there's plenty of time to do that in the future. I'm thinking there's not, because there's this huge drop-off rate, right? So again, I'm not criticizing you particularly on this or anybody, and I don't even know if I have the answer. I'm just saying, like, I'm trying to look at it from a different perspective, because the argument that I get is that we can't coach athletes too specifically too young. And I to a certain extent, I absolutely agree with that. I don't think there's 50-meter swimmers at the age of 11, 12. Like we can't just say that. But I'm also saying that we can't just coach everybody the same way until they get to college, because again, we've got this massive drop-off rate. So we've got to find ways that we can connect kids and keep them in the sport longer. So why can't we start to establish this, if there's an emphasis on technique, why can't there be an emphasis on the way that they're doing it at Virginia, this expectation of maybe some intensities, maybe some expectations of, specific type of work, those sorts of things that maybe keep the kids in the sport longer. You know what I'm trying to say with that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, for sure. And something that, resonated with me a long time ago, it's like someone had asked, I think it was actually a track coach, but he asked kind of about, club development. And his response was, the only thing for sure is that the kids that aren't on the club aren't going to get better. And basically, that's kind of to what your point was, is that if they quit, they're not going to keep getting better. Or if they, if they're done, they're not going to keep getting better. And so the first priority really has to be make sure that they stay. And so if that means, adjusting what you do so that people stay engaged, I think that's never going to be a losing proposition, because if they don't keep coming to practice, they're not going to get better. And so I think, from a skill standpoint, for sure, like that needs to be a huge focus. If there are people that don't want to swim 60,000 meters a week or whatever it is, even half that, there need to be options for them too, because they can still swim really fast. And like you said, if they're not going to be swimming in college, there's no reason to wait to do some of these things, because it's not like it's going to be unhealthy for them or anything like that. So I think, like you said, the biggest priority needs to be keeping kids swimming, and there shouldn't be any options that are off the table, because if it allows people to feel like they have a rewarding experience, then and allows them to continue to swim, then that needs to be something that's definitely entertained for sure.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've got this 15-year-old girl who's, I had a conversation with her. She just kind of moved into my group, and she's only swimming a couple of times a week because she plays water polo. And I said, what do you want to do in the future? She's like, I want to play water polo in college. And I'm like, that's cool. But like when I dig into her past a little bit, it's only because she's kind of been beat down, and no one's really recognized her as a sprinter, and no one's challenged her enough, and no one's given her the type of skill that she deserves and wants. And so the more I start to work with her, the more I think, like, and maybe even she realizes, like, you could swim in college. You could be a great contributor in college. You could swim fast, and you could be part of a team. And so I don't want her to give up on that dream just because water polo is more fun, and she just doesn't love the work that she was doing in the past. And it's not to say she's lazy or she doesn't want to be a swimmer. She's got a lot of talent, and she's got an affinity for speed. She loves to go fast, and it's like, the more I give it to her, the more she's eating it up. And I'm like, maybe she'll have a shift here in the next year or so where she's like, maybe I do want to swim in college. Maybe I want to do both. That's cool too. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. And so that's a perfect example of someone who would otherwise just quit. And so, for those people, and even for a lot of swimmers, like you said, they're not going to be swimming in college, no matter what. And so there needs to be, alternatives that keep them engaged in the sport, because otherwise they're just not going to keep swimming, and they're definitely not going to get faster if that's the case. And so, I'm open certainly to all solutions, because I think whatever keeps kids swimming is going to help them fast, and that's going to help, the sport in general.
Well, I love that you wrote a book, and especially wrote a book about swimming. I think the more the better. And there's few and far between with the books that are being written these days. I think we tend to look back on some books from, the late 90s, early 2000s, things like that. And it's good to see guys that are writing, relevant, fresh ideas and putting them down so that we can share those. So congrats on that, man. And thanks for doing it.
Thanks.
I know it's a lot of work. So hopefully everyone goes out and buys the book and learns from it, and we can share it. So appreciate your time today, mate.
Thanks, Brett. Appreciate you having me.
What's next for you? Where are you going next?
I'm just doing some consulting stuff, and we'll kind of see where that takes me. I'm enjoying that and having fun with that, and kind of, just rolling with that, and then see if something else comes my way.
That's where I was a couple of months ago. So I love it. It's a good space to be in, man. So keep it up.
Yeah.
All right. Appreciate your time. Take care.
Thanks. Take care, Brett.